Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. You ready?
Ready when you are.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Attar Hasibullah. First name spelled A-T-H-A-R. Last name spelled H-A-S-E-E-B-U-L-L-A-H. I'm the Executive Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Nevada. Obviously, we've connected with many of you before, specifically over the course of the last 12 months, where we've been attempting to procure investigative records and body cam footage from an incident that occurred last year outside of Durango High School involving two clients that we represent who are children. And the reason why we undertook representation of those kids is because children have a right to feel safe in their environment wherever they are. And unfortunately, we've spent the better part of the last year attempting to engage in a lengthy, costly fight with the Clark County School District as they've attempted to use public dollars to hire private lawyers to fight the release of public records. During the pendency of the last year, our attorney fee amount alone nears $50,000 just on this matter. It's an unreasonable amount that would be incurred upon any individual that sought those same public records. We have the resources to be able to continue that fight, to maintain that fight, and to bring that fight forward. The average person does not. And this is an example of how the government abuses the public records laws, abuses confidentiality provisions that exist within Nevada law to try to hide the ball when it comes to transparency. We've seen it time and time again. Yesterday, we finally received, after a court hearing a court order last month required the Clark County School District to turn over the body camera footage. We received the footage yesterday. Today, you're going to hear from our legal director, Christopher Peterson, who's going to walk you through a couple of the things we've seen from our initial observations and potential items surrounding that, as well as some legal analysis. You'll also hear from Quentin Savoie, the president of our local chapter of the NAACP. A few things do stand out to us when we went through the body camera footage. Namely, CCSD lied. They lied about the basis for the stop of everyone involved in this incident. They stated it was with respect to a firearm that was in the area, and that's what they were investigating. There was no firearm on any of our clients. This was a BS justification to stop and accost children. And as we've seen from the video, the basis for the stop was because one student looked at this officer, Officer Elfberg, in a manner that Officer Elfberg did not like. The video is quite clear. At a minute into the video, on one of the body camera footages, on Officer Elfberg's body camera footage, which the district fought so hard and spent so much money to prevent the release of, Officer Elfberg tells the student, "Come here, man. You wanted my attention? You got it. You want to keep looking at me and talking? You got it." That's the basis for the stop. So regardless of however many ways anybody tries to spin this, the video is clear. People can make the observation for themselves after this video now has been released as to what happened during the incident. From our vantage point, though, the basis for the stop is specified within that initial portion. You have a student, a young person, who looked at this officer wrong, and he decided to take out his anger on these students. But it doesn't stop there. You thereafter have a student, another young person, who is standing on the sidewalk, walking. One of our clients, walking down the sidewalk, not doing anything. And Officer Elfberg approaches that student, says, come here, let's go. I told you to start walking, and now you want to be a part of it, now you're a part of it. The student wasn't doing anything, walking away, asking for his mom. And this is the part that sometimes gets lost in this narrative. We're dealing with children. The redacted faces don't always allow for you to understand that, but these are children involved in this incident. Next, Officer Elfberg tells one of our clients, you want next, dude, as that client is recording. And at the same time, all he's doing is engaging in what's protected by the First Amendment, by the Fourth Amendment, by NRS Section 171.1233, which allows for the recordation of those types of incidents. But you have this officer screaming at this child, you want next. Ask yourselves, is this the best use of the resources we have? Where is the oversight by the school district? That's a question that we want answered. We'll jump into the next steps in a few minutes, but I'd be remiss if I say this sham that the Clark County School District put forward for a year to suggest that these students were stopped because of a gun has been proven to be BS. It's not real, it's fake, and we understand now why they spent a year hiding it. You'll hear from Quentin Savoie, too, who will mention what we thought was the use of a racial epithet during the actual detention, the unlawful detention of these students. And now my expectation, so you know, is the school district is going to go back and say, we stopped them for jaywalking, which is also invalid under the provisions that we've seen on the video and the law as it stands, and also begs other questions. How many other students have you stopped? Or is it because these students are black kids, young black men who are walking down the street, and you have a rowdy police officer? And in fact, Officer Elfberg at one point even admits he's not calm. The students are de-escalating these situations. They're stating what they were attempting to do, which is record, and they're in their lawful right to do so. But Officer Elfberg states, if I got to be heavy-handed, it is what it is. If I showed up at your house with 30 people, would I be acting calm? That's our school police department. The police chief for CCSD submitted an affidavit continuously suggesting throughout that affidavit and through the narrative that surrounded this that CCSD police stopped these kids because of this gun incident that they were investigating, which has been proven to be false. And he submitted declarations to the court over and over that there was reasonable suspicion and that these students were acting in a suspicious manner. What was the suspicion? So it begs the question now. There's a lot more questions than there are answers from our vantage point. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the public dollars used to fight against the release of this record and all of these records from this incident is egregious. The fact that no school board trustee has intervened and asked the question on the record, how much have we paid this really expensive private law firm using your money, using our public budget to outsource that when they hire staff attorneys in-house to represent them? It's egregious. Where's the oversight? Where's the accountability? From our vantage point, there hasn't been any. We're hoping that someone would intervene at some point and do something on the government's end. But there's been attempts to prevent the release of these records every single step of the way. And for any family out there that is attempting to obtain public records on your own, for any media outlet that's attempting to obtain public records on your own, one thing to remember, too, is that they won't make it easy for you. That's the reality. Despite strong protections in place, they are going to do everything they can to obstruct the release of these records in many instances, and a non-transparent government is a non-accountable government, and that's what we have right now. We're pleased that we were able to get these records, but it's unfortunate it's come to that. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Chris Peterson, who's our legal director, and then Quentin Savoie, and then we'll take some questions at the end.
Give us another second.
I'm going to pause just a minute to allow, there's a few additional people who are going to be coming into the room. But I am going to take a moment. Let's see, get the mic up there. Just take your time. See everything out.
Thank you for your patience.
For sure. So my name is Christopher Peterson. I'm the legal director here at the ACLU Nevada. My name is spelled CHRISTOPHER, I'm going to walk through a bit of the legal issues that we're seeing as we review the video. We are still reviewing the video. Obviously, we received a few separate body-worn camera clips that we're watching through. We also are reviewing, again, the report that we received and the catalog. But I want to start by pointing out that we are clearly seeing First Amendment violations here. Previously, we had discussed the importance of the right to film police interactions, and that's protected under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. However, there's also the right to criticize and to question officers. And we're seeing that from our clients on the body-worn camera. We're also seeing that from other students. And that's precisely what people should be doing when they're observing police misconduct. And the fact that the students here bravely stood their ground on a public sidewalk, which they were allowed to stand on, in the face of threats of retaliation, that they would be taken into custody, that they would be arrested, that repeatedly told to walk on when they were not required to do so, as admirable. We have seen repeatedly, over and over again across this country, that often the only way we get accountability from police that engage in misconduct is from brave people who are standing by, recording and questioning the police. We saw that with George Floyd. We've seen that in other instances. And if those people had walked on, there would have been no accountability. And when we look at the students here, including our clients, this is the only way we get accountability for police misconduct from the Clark County School District Police Department. Now, I also want to emphasize that despite the characterization or the efforts to mischaracterize what's going on by the police in their ongoing narrative in the body-worn camera, questioning the police is not escalation. Demanding answers is not escalation. That is an obligation that every member of our public has when they are observing police interactions that are inappropriate. When the police use violence, we should be asking why they're using violence. Another constitutional violations that we're seeing, of course, are Fourth Amendment violations. There is no basis to detain our clients. That's obvious from the video. And when we also watch the video, we're now seeing that Officer Ellsberg pulled out his pepper spray. That is a use of force, and that is something that we have seen documentation of misuse of pepper spray by Clark County School District police officers again and again, especially in situations where it was not warranted and threatening students who are standing by watching the officers as they detain students or engage in other forms of violence. So obviously that is a concern that we have here. Something else that needs to be noted. Any danger in this situation was manufactured by Ellsberg. And the way we know this is obviously as we watch how other officers are reacting to the situation. It is only Ellsberg who is yelling. It is only Ellsberg who is detaining students. It is only Ellsberg pulling out pepper spray. Those other officers did not act appropriately. They needed to stop Ellsberg from acting the way he was acting. And obviously we are concerned about broader cultural problems at the Clark County School District Police Department and their willingness to rubber stamp what happened this day. But the behavior of the officers clearly indicate that there was not a concern about ongoing danger and that the students, other students that were present, were not acting inappropriately. And so there is no reason for pepper spray to be pulled out or threats of violence to occur or threats of arrest to have happened. Now, at this point, obviously, we continue to litigate to get more records about what happened that day, and in particular, the Clark County School District's response to what happened that day. As the Clark County School District has made clear in its filings, there was no disciplinary action taken against Ellsberg for his behavior, even though there were clear constitutional violations and use of force problems that happened that are apparent on the body-worn camera, and was done so without justification. That is a problem both culturally with the school district, but also legally. And so in turn, we continue to seek these records, not only for our clients, but obviously for the public to have a broader understanding of what is at stake when they send their children to these schools and whether or not their children are safe in the hands of the Clark County School District Police Department. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Quentin Savar, who is the president of the local chapter at the NAACP.
Excuse me. Good morning, folks.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
I'm just going to let Brian get settled in. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll go through all that. It's special. Brian, we in good shape? Cool. Good morning, everybody. My name is Quentin Savoy. That's Quentin. Last name is S as in Sam, A as in Apple, V as in Victor, WOIR. I'm the president of the Las Vegas branch of the NAACP, that's National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. I'm before you this morning because this is a case that came to our branch a whole year ago almost. And we're talking about it today because it is newsworthy. But if you talk to any young person in CCSD, they would tell you that these are not newsworthy incidents, that they see this type of aggression amongst the folks that are supposed to protect our scholars and young people on a fairly regular occurrence. And it's very disturbing that it took an entire year for the public to find out exactly what happened, as we have continually been told about tropes that were used as a justification to stop these young people. The NAACP has 4 demands today. First, we demand that the Clark County School District trustees revise the use of force policy. Some months ago, Superintendent Yara said that there would be no changes to the use of force policy and that they would not be releasing this body cam footage. Well, we got them to correct one of those things, but now we need the trustees to look at this footage and to make serious changes to the use of force policy. We will be taking up that mantle through our education committee and organizing the stories of our young people who know that this is happening in order to beget such change. Second, we demand that District Attorney Steve Wolfson open an investigation to create accountability. Let's talk about accountability really quickly, though. When I assumed this office a year ago, I talked about how accountability is love, and how when you are a public servant, it is expected that you are to be held accountable by your community. That doesn't always mean that we have to be at each other's throats, but it does mean that we have a responsibility to say, you can do better. And that is a show of love. And we should be able to say to the folks that lead our school district, you can do better, because our young people deserve better, and that is a show of love. D.A. Wolfson, you have a responsibility to spread some love in this situation, create some accountability for those that have wronged our scholars. Third, we call for stronger continuing education for our law enforcement officers within schools, because looking at said footage, it's clear that they are not familiar with the law. And it's clear that they also don't have great temperament when dealing with young people. I'm not a parent, but I know that teenagers can have slick mouths. I know they can look sideways sometimes. I don't know that I've ever been looked at by a young person in such a way that made me want to act in a barbaric manner. We have to do better. We have to be more mature than the young people that we are cultivating to be leaders in our own communities. And finally, we implore the unions to stop protecting a culture of violence and aggression against our young people. The executive director of the ACLU spoke on it earlier when he gave his remarks about how this gun was used. And I'm wondering, is this a trope that is often and regularly used for black and brown students to justify aggression and dehumanizing their personhood? Please stop protecting this culture, because we need to be able to know that those who are protecting our law enforcement officers in schools have integrity and are also going to hold their members accountable when they wrong our students. Finally, we want to ask for the community to hold these parents up in peace and in goodness, because I can't imagine what they've been going through in this last year. The NAACP stands ready to support them in ways that we can and the ways that we best can show up. And thank you so much for being here today.
With that, we'll go ahead and take questions. I'll have Quentin and Chris also remain up here, and we'll just field them as they're coming in.
So it's all right. I know y'all had mentioned this. You called it and described it as police misconduct or officer misconduct. And I know Quentin talked about employing Steve Wolfson to investigate. But what's next in this? I mean, I know Attorney General Ford, before he got elected, he talked about, zeroing in on officer misconduct and bad behavior. But have you, appealed to his office to try to investigate CCSD PD or?
I would venture to say I don't think there's anyone in the state that isn't aware of the incident that's occurred. Every elected official in the state knows what's occurred. There were multiple hearings during the legislative session that revolved around this incident. And there's been a lot of lip service. But when it comes time to actually investigate the misconduct that's occurred, crickets. We were told by the district attorney's office that They won't investigate the incident. They won't investigate the officer involved, and they won't pursue anything against the officer involved until such time as CCSD police refers that officer for prosecution themselves. What an absurd insinuation. Totally absurd. If the roles were reversed here, and I'd even venture and go as far as to say, swap out what the victims look like. Let's see how the treatment would occur there. I don't believe that there would have been a lot of sitting on their hands as government officials, which is what's occurred. There needs to be a better investigation into the district as a whole. The trustees need to hold their leadership accountable. And the entire system really needs to have a thorough examination. We need to take a pause as a community and say, is the government serving the people? But the fact that even upon press request after press request, there was no attempt to intervene on behalf of media, for instance, and say, hey, they're actually entitled to these public records, turn them over, is a problem. With respect to what's next, I can, on our client's end, I can pass that over to Chris.
And the question is not if we will be filing a lawsuit, the question is when, and the question is who will be the defendants in that lawsuit. At this point, we're exploring our options on that front, and I think a big priority for us is to make sure that there's accountability beyond just the officer that is on the scene, but everyone who has condoned that behavior and has fostered a culture of violence amongst the CCSD Police Department. Our goal is to make it safer for students to go to schools and to make sure that when they go, a parent is not going to get a call that their child has been seriously injured or killed by a Clark County School District Police Department officer. I mean, the parents of our clients were terrified by what happened. You can see it on the video when one of the parents show up and how upset she is. And she handled that remarkably well. She engaged in her First Amendment rights to question while standing on a public sidewalk as to what was going on and received threats of arrest in response. She was entitled to do that. The other parent rushed to the scene as fast as she could, terrified that when she arrived, that her child would not be alive. No parent should have to go through that. And we should not have a culture in our school district where parents need to be afraid of that. Obviously, this video does not assuage that concern amongst parents that have their children going to this school district. Our goal is to bring litigation to make sure that the people involved in this incident are held accountable and that these incidents stop happening.
I'll also mention, before we take the next question too, I know some of you will probably ask for time frame, so I'll just preempt that right now. We have to go through every camera, assess every claim, assess every possibility, and continue our quest to get these additional records that we're still waiting on so that we can make sure that we have everything that's up to date. One of the things that Chris had mentioned was the reaction of the parents. When you have Officer Elfberg hang up on the mother of one of the students who's detained, hang up. Imagine your child is being detained unlawfully, and you have an officer that just hangs up the phone and said, we're not going to do that. It raises a lot of serious questions, but the time frame is as soon as we can investigate. You know, we don't move on anybody else's timeline. Our clients deserve justice, and that requires the best representation in the state, which we provide. And that's how we were able to get these records. Next question. Joe?
Do you think there's more police body camera video that we haven't seen? In some of the videos, you see the cars driving up, and you see cars in front of them. So there was cars there before a lot of these officers arrived. Is there more police body camera video? And
there's not a way for us to determine that yet. We're still investigating those pieces. The other thing that we'd also be investigating is the time frame of the actual footage that's turned over, right? So we have about a 25-minute clip in the main video from Officer Elfberg. There's other videos that are there, but the length of time that was provided also raises questions. So we're looking at everything right now, and as soon as we do a few different reviews of this, we're not going to have like one batch of reviews for this, right? It's going to be multiple rounds of reviews with multiple eyes on it. Unfortunately, as Chris and I were mentioning this morning, the camera footage was released last night. We've probably both watched this about a dozen times at this point, and every time we've watched it, we found more issues than the previous time. So my anticipation is, as we continue to vet this out, it'll also be likely that additional questions get raised. Tiffany?
Just to follow up on that question, it seems like the incident report has a whole series of things that were described leading up to the detainments, but you don't see those in the videos. Is that something that is of concern to you? And then, second question, outside of Elfberg's video, was there anything else in any of the other videos that really stood out to you?
I was just going to refer to them as lying again, but I'll let Chris probably give a more articulate response. I don't think the reports are going to match up with the body camera footage. Just like their narrative didn't match up with the body camera footage. Everyone heard them continuously put out a narrative that they were stopping these kids because of a firearm-related incident. And what you see is an officer engaged in misconduct. It's plain to see. If you don't watch the full video, watch the first 60 seconds of the video. Because the first 60 seconds is the basis for the stop, and everything is laid out plain as day there.
So to answer your question, obviously it's concerning whenever an officer files a report that does not match up with the body-worn camera. That's part of the reason why we fight for body-worn camera. We don't just simply accept whatever narrative the government and its employees push out. And that's why we've pushed so hard, obviously, when it comes to the state legislature and all that, to make sure that police departments are required to have body-worn camera for their officers, and to do whatever we can to protect the right for organizations such as ourselves or journalists to file public records requests for a body-worn camera. However, something that is interesting in that report is essentially Elfberg saying that he's detaining people for criticizing him, for stating, talking about protecting their cousins or whatnot. And as you can see in the video, those statements are being made in a way that is a calm fashion considering the circumstances on a public sidewalk, so you can talk from your public sidewalk and are not accompanied by any other actions that would be illegal, right? And protected constitutional activity, and Elfberg is acknowledging in his report that he's essentially retaliating against our client for engaging in protected constitutional activity. Of course, this also reflects a deeper concern, which is CCSD police training its officers to recognize what a constitutional violation is? Obviously, there are questions about what kind of training their officers receive regarding First Amendment rights of students and other people that they're interacting with. The response with Chief Blackeye was that, they get the training they need. Our public records request for that training resulted in no responsive records being provided. So, clearly, from a litigation standpoint, we appreciate that report and what's stated in there for the purposes of the claims that we'd be bringing. But obviously, it shows deeper signs of problems and cultural problems with the Clark County School District Police Department.
Yeah, one other thing I'll mention on that too. If, as his union rep has stated over and over, as Quentin pointed out, that Officer Elfberg is this stand-up guy and that there are no issues here, release his investigative background, show his disciplinary history. If you're the stand-up guy that's calm and de-escalating, and as he mentioned in the video, which he said 14 years in and I've never been sued. Says this on video. 14 years in, I've never been sued. Turn over your disciplinary record. Let us see it. Let the public have access to it. They attempted every step of the way to preclude that from being released, when in fact you're serving the public. And you're not even serving adults. You're serving children. These are children. Next question.
Also, there's more than 2 hours of video, and a good portion of it is the officer explaining to the parents and to the student, or at least one student, what happened, and it seemed to de-escalate the situation. That's my, I've seen it once, you've seen it many times. How do you interpret that?
Yeah, it's quite easy after you're the one who perpetuates and instigates and starts an incident to thereafter come in as the voice of reason, especially when you're dealing with children. You have a bad stop. That's obvious. It's obvious from the first minute of the video. 2 minutes in, you have an attack on another student. Multiple detentions of students for no reason. And yet, some will end up hailing this officer as a de-escalator. We think it's a joke. That's if I go and I start a fight with someone, and then I say, whoa, calm down, will you hail me as a hero, a great bringer of peace to a scenario? Absolutely not. But it's easy when that shows up, when that narrative gets spun, because at that point when the parents show up, it's a few minutes later. Officer Elfberg's in control. He's in control of their custody. He says he's in control. And he says if I'm not mistaken, I can arrest whoever I want. Or I can stop whoever I want. I believe he said I can stop whoever I want. So when you have a power dynamic like that, and you're in power the entire time, the fact that he was admittedly not calm throughout and said he was heavy-handed demonstrates from the beginning where the incident lied. And now you're dealing with children on the back end who are screaming for their parents, saying, someone call my mom. And Officer Elfberg goes as far as to hang up on one of the moms.
That's not reflected on these videos, is it?
522.
Okay.
And if I could add something really quickly, I think what's an even bigger trouble is in this political climate that we're in, you have folks who, with Officer Elfberg, suggesting that he's calm and that he's de-escalated the situation. We all saw the video. So basically this narrative of flipping it to make it seem as though you're not actually seeing, you're not actually seeing what you're seeing. You're seeing something else and I'm the good guy. That is a threat to democracy. That is a threat to democracy and the systems that we rely on to sustain the system that we all enjoy. In this particular case, we're talking about the system that educates our young people. But as a community, we have to stand up when someone is trying to tell us, oh no, the sky's not blue, it's purple. Because that's exactly what they're trying to do in this case. I'm the de-escalator. No, you barbarically wrestled a kid to the ground and put your knee in his back. And you're trying to convince the entire valley that that's not what happened. No, we all have a responsibility to stand up and say when that is wrong.
One thing I would say is also, just as an attorney watching that, when I am telling a mother that I am not going to let your child go until you stop criticizing me, that's a constitutional violation. It doesn't matter if I yell it at you. It doesn't matter if I say it with a smile on my face and a calm tone. If I tell a mother, oh, you better stop talking to me, I don't like what you're saying to me, and I'm going to continue to keep your child in handcuffs until you stop criticizing me, that violates the First Amendment, and it violates the child's Fourth Amendment rights. It is entirely inappropriate.
Chris, I have a follow-up to that. I think
Yeah.
immediately after the exchange you're talking about, the officer also says she's going to talk herself into handcuffs as well. Can you elaborate a little bit more for the
Yeah.
public who's wondering what exactly are their rights when they're,
Yes.
they're facing a tense situation like this with officers?
Of course. I would say that as observed on the video, the mother is standing on the sidewalk. She has a respectful distance from the officer, but she's allowed to yell and criticize. That's been well-established law. It's been established for decades now, and almost precisely the same circumstances as what was going on here. And his threat of, I'm going to put you in handcuffs, violates the First Amendment. You cannot chill First Amendment activity. And the threat of arrest is chilling First Amendment activity.
And correct me if I'm wrong, one of the mothers were expecting a child, right?
That is correct.
You know, I just want to circle back to this because I know we're employing Wilson office, but what about the Attorney General in this? Have you at all been able to communicate with him? I mean, he did run on this whole holding police departments accountable. CCSD PD is one of them.
You know, so here's the thing. They have access to the footage, right? They have access to the information. Every government entity does. We have done our part, in our opinion, to share that there should be an investigation launched here over and over and over. Whether or not they choose to do it is at their discretion. Now, I can't speak for their office. You know, I'm not the Attorney General. If I was, this would have been investigated on the state's end, right? It's not the reality of the situation, which is why we get involved in these types of scenarios, because the public has a right to know. And they have a right to know what actually happened beyond the government's narrative around what happened. They have a right to know what actually happened.
What do you think it says that multiple times I think Elfberg mentions, oh, my body cam's rolling, this is going to all be captured, and yet it took them more than a year to release this. What did you kind of take away from them mentioning that all the time and it took this long?
Absolute posturing on his end, attempting to show that he's a person in authority, a person in charge, and he's acting correctly. It's the same way that when Chief Blackeye gave a declaration and stated that effectively drew a legal conclusion that the stops were valid, that he's in control and he's not. Elfberg attempted to do the same throughout the incident. You know, one of the parts that really stood out was saying, again, 14 years in, nobody sued me. What's the point of referencing that, right? It's to attempt to show that I'm acting correctly once parents arrive, once others are at the scene. He also says to the students at one point, he said, you want to put on a show, this is the show you'll get, right? These are students that are walking down the street. They're not doing anything at all. And this whole narrative, I mean, what I think the biggest portion of frustration on our end was attempting to suggest that in any way our clients or any of these students, as Quentin had mentioned, were related or implicated in some firearms-related incident. Never happened. And if you had the basis to stop anybody in the state of Nevada for a firearms possession within a certain radius, everybody in Nevada would be under arrest because we're all in proximity to firearms at any given point. There was no sort of description suggested that they were ever in possession, no matching of any identity with respect to an incident that may have happened prior or thereafter. Instead, you just have an angry Officer Elfberg who decides to take out his frustration on these kids and then attempts to suggest he's in charge. And he says it when he says, I can stop wherever I want.
And just to add an additional legal gloss to that, if an officer detains someone to investigate a crime, they're required to investigate that crime. And if they are not going to investigate that crime, they need to stop the detention, right? They need to let the person go. Because if you detain someone, it is to investigate the purpose of the detention. Something that is obvious is that they detain these young people and then ask no questions about a firearm to these people, right? And so that completely undercuts their entire claim that they stopped these young men to investigate a firearm, right? They're not stopping these young men to investigate a firearm. As Attar pointed out from the very beginning, you look at that first minute when he said, when he says essentially, you drew my attention, you have my attention, and now I'm detaining you, right? If he's actually investigating a crime, it shouldn't have been about any sort of action by the student drawing his attention, right? He would have matched a description or whatnot. So in addition to the fact his own statement suggesting that is because something the student has done to aggravate him, and now he's detaining people, you can also see he was legally required to investigate whatever offense he supposedly was investigating, and you don't see any of that after he detains these young people.
Just to follow up on that, it seemed like in a lot of the videos and several different officers, when describing to the students what was happening, a lot of it seemed like they were actually telling the students it's because we told you to walk away and you didn't. It didn't seem like when they were fully describing it that they were saying the gun thing, even though that's part of the background of what was in the incident report. Was it also your understanding that they were telling the students, like, we've detained you because you weren't walking away when we told you and you weren't listening to me? And then secondly, can you legally detain students if they're not listening to you?
Okay, and I can take that one too. I can do it.
To be clear, if that was the case, then no one could stand on a sidewalk and record an officer. That's something you hear regularly over and over again. Walk away, walk away, walk away, because they don't want to be recorded and they don't want to be questioned. You don't have to walk away just because an officer told you to walk away. And in some ways, the very concept undercuts the entire concept of civil liberties and constitutional rights, right? Those young people were not violating the law by standing there on a sidewalk, asking questions and filming what those officers were doing, and in fact threatening them, saying, if you don't walk away, I'm going to throw you in cuffs, violates their First Amendment rights. To be clear, it's not just our clients' rights that were being violated. It's not even our clients' parents' rights that were being violated. All of those students that were asking questions but were being told to walk away or you will be punished had their rights being violated that day.
We also, the section we specifically mentioned with respect to NRS 171.1233 under state law specifically prohibits officers from engaging in conduct to thwart the prevention of recording, including engaging in an arrest of this nature or a detention of this nature to basically stop them. If there is no obstruction of an investigation, first, there doesn't appear to be any investigation, and on the back end, there is no obstruction of any investigation. You see students moving backwards. And in fact, we saw something that came out yesterday that said the officer said, keep moving, and then the student said no. Let's preface the whole entire statement. The entire statement that the officer kept saying was, you want next, you want next. You want next, dude? And then said, keep moving. And you see quite clearly a student recording and moving backwards. And Officer Elfberg moves forward to pursue them. He doesn't, the student's not stopped at that moment, moving backwards. And Officer Elfberg is pursuing that student to go after him because he did not want video footage of it. That's our assumption. And that, to me, is pretty clear from the video to come out. And as much as he says on the back end, towards the end of the video, 14 years, I'm just de-escalating. And he went on this bizarre diatribe about 15 minutes into the video saying how he was attempting to protect the student's life. There is no logical connection to have a conversation like that with the student. I'm trying to protect you. You pulled this kid's over. You jumped out of your car. You were driving. You jump out of your car, go after these kids, and that's on video, clear as day, for no reason other than they looked at you funny and they may have said something, right? And so even that part isn't clear what he says he heard. But again, stand-up guy, release your disciplinary history. Next question. I think we have one over here.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's an issue of accessibility of body cam footage in the state, or is this just solely a CCSD issue? And if you have any changes that you would suggest in state law that could make it easier to get these kinds of records as opposed to, waiting out a whole year almost.
I can speak to the first part, and I'll let Chris jump into the policy portion. Is there an issue? Yes. You all can't receive that footage just like we can't without a fight. Unfortunately, the public should have known about this long ago. They attempted to use a confidentiality provision that protects our clients and protects the public to their benefit. That's not what the purpose of the Public Records Act was, and not the purpose of the confidentiality privileges that exist. The fact that this has cost us tens of thousands of dollars in expenditures, drain capacity on our end, because the district simply doesn't want to comply with the law, is a problem. And it's been on display now. It's on display for everybody to see. If nothing else comes from this, and again, the purpose of the footage is for you to draw your own conclusions, right? We're telling you what our positions are with respect to that footage. You draw your own conclusions. You come up with your own narrative. Say what you'd like to. Our goal was to, first and foremost, get access to these records for the public. And from our vantage point, we did that. And had it been anyone else in another position, had parents retained private counsel to go and get this camera footage, they probably would have spent $100,000 at least doing so, because of the amount of intensive efforts they have created, the district has created every step of the way to obstruct our access to the camera footage and the reports.
And to be clear, this is a problem that we're seeing across the state in a variety of ways. We have seen that in the context of escalating fees for body camera footage that is unrelated to the amount of work that's being put in, that makes body camera footage so prohibitively expensive that your average person can't afford it. Only organizations like the ACLU and maybe some of the best funded news organizations can pay for those fees. We have seen that in the context of efforts by organizations like police unions to pull down footage, claiming somehow it violates officer privacy, even though they are engaging in public service when they have their body-worn camera on, and it's meant to be ways of holding them accountable. There's active, concerted efforts by governmental entities across the state to bar access to this body-worn camera. This is part of a broader effort to do that. And we can see in this instance exactly why they wouldn't want that released, because it does not look good for the officers that were on scene, but also makes the people running those government entities look bad when they've told us all one story and the body-worn camera tells us something very, very different.
Oh, we have you over here. I'll also mention, too, there'll be framing of this by some folks that'll say this is ACLU, NAACP, these are anti-police organizations. No, we're not anti-police. We're anti-bad policing, we're pro-accountability, and we're pro-transparency, right? You don't have an accountable police department in CCSD PD. You don't have a transparent department, and the public requires that. Officer Elfberg and his supervisors that have done nothing to hold him accountable have disgraced their badge.
I have a question for the NAACP. You mentioned earlier that you guys are willing to support the families in this matter. Is there any way that the families listening can know those ways that you guys are willing to support?
Absolutely. I think the lifeblood of the NAACP is our membership and our ability to be able to go out and talk to community about what their lived experiences have been. I am of the mind that our collective voices is what begets policy change. And as I mentioned at the top of my remarks, this is not new to the kids that go to CCSD schools every day. I talk to young people and they're like, no, the school police, they'll just randomly spray mace just into a crowd with no regard for who's there, no regard for who's involved in an incident or who's not involved in an incident. So we definitely have some issues with the culture of policing within CCSD PD. So I think our best way to show up is to collect the stories of our community members, and then when the families decide how we can best be of support, they know how to be in touch with us.
Joe.
In the video, you hear a couple other officers talking amongst themselves, and they talked about how there may have been a fight that day over by the Jack in the Box. They also mentioned a gun that day, and they mentioned a gun the day before. And then they say that there's discussion about them feeling that people were crowding in on them, the kids were crowding in on the officers. Like, it sounded like they felt threatened. What's what's your response to that if that's how they felt?
Yeah, it's from our vantage point entirely deceptive. Again, as Chris mentioned, you go to the initial basis for the stop and the investigation related to the stop. Officer Elfberg started this. He started this. These are students that are walking, grab a bite to eat, moving forward. They're not doing anything, minding their own business. They're not connected to any gun incident. They're not connected to any fight. There's no suggestion they have been. But on the back end of things, now these officers that show up at the scene to support Officer Elfberg, as he's saying escalating conflict or anything else of the sort, when he's signaling for backup, these same officers are attempting, in our vantage point, and again, I'm not saying that their lived experience in terms of what they're observing is, I feel, crowded in. That might have been their experience. That's their own fault because they refuse to hold their officers accountable when they engage in bad policing stops. To put it into perspective further, to add another layer to this, let's say that the stop was for jaywalking. Let's just assume that. Again, we don't agree. We think it's wrong. We think the whole thing is made up. Officer Elfberg, at that point, how many times has he stopped someone for jaywalking? And then you stop a group, and then afterwards you say, everybody's crowding me, when in fact they're a distance away and they're moving backwards. Beyond the notion of like whether or not these officers are properly trained, we don't know anything at this point, dispositively, outside of complaints we've heard from the public about Officer Elfberg's history. So release your disciplinary file and show how many incidents you've actually had. If you don't have any incidents, then it should be no problem. But what's with the hiding of that background information? Look, if someone were to ask me for my personnel file right now, and how many times I've been disciplined in any work setting, and this goes for anybody in my staff, I'd be happy to turn that over, because there are none. And I'm sure it's the same with most people. But Officer Elfberg believes he's above that, as does the CCSD Police Department. We mention that portion with respect to the disciplinary history because if issues are unsubstantiated, then it'll say unsubstantiated at the bottom of the report. But this was an employment investigation that occurred into him on this particular incident, where there weren't even witness statements according to the district until they went and recanted that and said there were. So their story has changed so many times over that the best thing to do would be to be transparent. And he on his own, if he's the stand-up guy, should go ahead and release the record. That's what I would do if I was attempting to clear my name.
I want to invite you to tell us whether it's accurate to compare this circumstance, this incident, and the videos to the George Floyd in Minneapolis case.
You were asking all of it?
Anyone?
That's a very interesting question. I think what the video reveals is that there is a problem with the culture of policing in our country. And we use tropes to dehumanize black and brown people, in this case students, to justify aggression. And I don't think it's just in Las Vegas, it's not just in Minneapolis, it's countless stories that never get told across the American South, in the Midwest, right next door, Pacific Northwest, and these stories get swept under the rug because the government is able to come out and tell the community the narrative that these young people deserved what happened to them. And that's why I implore all of us, not in just this incident, but when you witness something with your own eyes and you know that it wasn't right, speak out against that. There are forces trying to convince us that the things we see are not the real things. So is there a comparison in the sense of direct comparison? Probably not. But when you look at the culture of policing across this country, there's definitely something that needs to be re-examined there. Absolutely.
And I think I offer a different perspective. I talked about this earlier, is the importance of bystanders, right? And the importance of the First Amendment right to observe police activity and record. You think about the setup and the arrangement. You have a crowd of people, but they're on a sidewalk, and they're asking questions, and they're filming. That isn't common. You have a person on the ground with a police officer on top of them. So clearly that person has not only been detained, but detained violently, right? And you need those bystanders to film, because without that film, we are here today, right? We're asking for transparency, demanding transparency, right? And the likelihood of accountability goes down because clearly the agency that employs that police officer is unwilling to hold that officer accountable. So there is relationship in that regard, right? And the importance of everyday people standing up and exercising their rights and recording what they're seeing and demanding an explanation as they're watching the police use violence. And, Joe, I want to go back to a question you asked about something the officer was saying later. I think something else that's also worth keeping in mind. As Elfberg himself says over and over again, I have a body-worn camera running. I know that this record's running. And so, while it may look like, we're talking amongst ourselves, there's always the possibility that we know that we're putting on a performance for everyone else. Because we know that we're going to make a record, and if this gets out, this will be our explanation, our justification. But the thing about body-worn camera is it starts filming from the beginning, right? And if you aren't talking about guns in a fight at the beginning, that's not what's going on. And if you watch those other officers and how their behavior is so different from Elfberg's, they're not talking about a fight. They're not talking about a gun with students, right? They're saying walk on, walk on, walk on, because they don't want people filming what their officers are doing. And so the post hoc justification, yes, the spin begins immediately after they have everyone detained and they start talking about these things. But the real question you should be asking is, what is the first thing that comes out of that officer's mouth? And it's not about a gun. It's not about a fight. It's about, you have my attention now, right? And now you're going to pay for that. That's what's being said.
Quick nuts and bolts. What are the ages of your clients? You said they're both juveniles?
At the time, they were both 14.
Both 14 at the time? What grade would that be?
I would need to go back and double check that. I believe it's 9th grade, but I need to go look.
And both male?
Yes.
Not using names. And one other nut and bolt. You said you reviewed or obtained the CAD log. What does that tell you?
So computer-assisted dispatch log, I need to go back and look at that, but just to explain what a CAD log is, typically when an incident opens up formally inside a system for a police department, they immediately start a log indicating who is going to be on the scene, right, and generally laying out what's going on. Some agencies are better about keeping detailed CAD logs than others. We're reviewing that right now. It's usually a bit more technical to pull good information out of a CAD log. Typically, that's something that you can use to start figuring out where all the puzzle pieces are supposed to fit in a particular incident. Right. How many officers arrived potentially, what officers were there, because you start getting their numbers, and sort of when were things being opened and closed as far as the agency was concerned, as far as the incident was going on.
We'll go ahead and take 2 more questions from those that haven't already asked them, and then we'll stick around a few minutes afterwards if we need to follow up, or you can connect with West on it. We have any 2 that haven't asked a question yet? But
this is a slightly broader question, but between what we saw with the officers saying there was a gun, so they were able to freshen these students, and the pedestrian bridges in the Strip, are we seeing a trend towards laws that are able to give law enforcement a sort of stop and frisk ability, even though they're not using that phrasing?
Both of the provisions are a little bit distinctive. So we'd say with the Selfiegate, as I'll refer to it, where they're attempting to criminalize selfie taking on the pedestrian bridges, again, which will also, you'll hear about that in our next steps there in the next few weeks. But with respect to that, yeah, we'd say that that's probably a provision there. If you can actually understand, if anybody here can understand, or anybody in the public can actually let us know what's prohibited, because we're still unclear what's prevented by the bill, as they've went through so many statements and said this isn't. With respect to this particular incident, I don't know that this is a necessarily, from a policy perspective, a basis for stop and frisk. Nothing changed there. It's the actual acting of really kind of something beyond stop and frisk. This is, I practiced in New York for a while, too, before I practiced in Nevada, and stop and frisk was rampant there for years. There was a lot more street encounters. What you didn't always have that's unique about this particular situation is an officer, a school police officer, let me rephrase, like Officer Elfberg, driving by, jumping out of his vehicle to approach students who looked at him in a way he didn't like. So I think they're a little bit distinctive, but the government's going to act in an unchecked way until someone checks them. And unfortunately, what we've come to realize, I think this goes to Joshua's question from earlier, is if we're relying on government to check other government, we're going to be in for an unfortunate experience overall, because they're simply not going to do it. Every step of the way throughout this entire process, the school district has not been transparent. And unfortunately, as we mentioned before, and I'll be clear on again, we're asking for transparency and accountability in policing. And for people who are unwilling to call out an incident like this, it shows that you're not even interested in that, right? And so, we're not going after and pursuing camera footage for every single stop that's occurred in history, right? It's limited to these types of incidents, and there's a reason why. We want more accountability. One more? Looks like we're good. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for suffering through the heat of
Kind of hot.
our office.
And I wore the heavy jacket. If you put the students at